The first signal came from beneath the ground. Not from a radio tower. Not from a satellite. Not from any human device that should have existed in that part of Yellowstone. It was a sound buried under hundreds of feet of ancient rock, something that traveled through the earth like the planet itself was trying to whisper. And the strangest part was not that we found it. The strangest part was that the signal appeared to know we were listening. My name is Daniel Mercer. For 14 years, I worked in wilderness observation and environmental research across some of the most isolated regions in North America. I spent months alone in forests where most people would never walk. I learned how to read weather patterns from clouds, how to identify animals by the smallest movement in the trees, and how to survive when the nearest human voice was 50 miles away. People often think the wilderness is frightening because of what might be hiding inside it. They imagine predators. They imagine things moving between the trees. They imagine something watching them from the darkness. But after years of studying remote landscapes, I learned something far more unsettling. The wilderness is frightening because it does not care whether we understand it. A forest does not explain itself. A mountain does not reveal its secrets. And sometimes, deep in places where humans rarely go, nature can show us something that makes us question whether we were ever supposed to find it. That is what happened in Yellowstone. And even now, years later, there are nights when I wake up convinced I can still hear it. That low vibration beneath the earth. That impossible rhythm. Like something buried below the surface was not calling for help. Like it was waiting. I had always been fascinated by Yellowstone National Park. To most people, Yellowstone was a place of beauty. A landscape painted with impossible colors. Geysers rising through the morning mist. Ancient forests stretching across volcanic valleys. Rivers cutting through mountains that had existed long before human history. But to someone like me, Yellowstone was something different. It was a living system. A place where the earth was constantly changing. A place where old things remained hidden. In the winter of 2019, I was assigned to assist with a remote geological monitoring project near the northern wilderness sections of the park. The official purpose was simple. We were tracking unusual underground activity. Minor seismic patterns. Thermal changes. Small variations that could help researchers better understand the volcanic system beneath Yellowstone. Nothing about the assignment sounded dangerous. At least, not at first. The area we were studying was far from the crowded tourist locations. No boardwalks. No viewing platforms. No visitors taking photographs. Just miles of forest, mountains, and frozen valleys. The kind of place where you could walk for days without seeing another person. The team consisted of 5 researchers. 2 geologists. 1 communications specialist. A wildlife technician. And me. My role was mostly field observation. I checked equipment stations, collected environmental data, and documented anything unusual. I had done similar work before. Remote locations. Long nights. Minimal communication. I knew the routine. Or at least I thought I did. The first week was normal. Cold mornings. Heavy snow. Strong winds passing through the pine forests. At night, the temperature dropped so low that the trees would crack from the freezing pressure. Those sounds were always unsettling. A deep snap echoing through the darkness. Almost like something large moving nearby. But I knew better. The forest had its own language. You just had to learn how to listen. Then, on the 8th night, we detected the signal. It happened at 2:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I was awake when it started. I had always struggled sleeping in the wilderness. Not because I was afraid. Because silence in remote places is never truly silent. There is always something. Wind moving through branches. Animals moving across snow. Distant water flowing beneath ice. The forest is alive. But that night, everything stopped. I was sitting inside the research cabin reviewing field notes when I noticed it. A faint vibration. At first, I thought it was the heater. The old generator outside. Maybe some equipment malfunction. But then I realized something. The sound was not coming from the cabin. It was coming from below. The floor beneath my boots was slightly vibrating. Almost impossible to notice. Almost like my mind was creating it. I stood still. Waiting. And then I heard it again. A deep pulse. 3 seconds. Then silence. 3 seconds. Then silence. I grabbed my recorder and walked outside. The cold air immediately hit my face. The kind of cold that makes your skin feel like it is shrinking. The forest surrounding the cabin was completely motionless. No wind. No animals. Nothing. I looked toward the equipment station 50 yards away. The seismic monitoring device was flashing. That was impossible. The system was designed to detect underground movement, but the readings were not showing an earthquake. They were showing a repeating pattern. A signal. I called the others. Within minutes, everyone was outside. At first, nobody was concerned. Scientists are trained to search for ordinary explanations. A malfunction. Equipment interference. A natural phenomenon. We tested everything. The device was functioning perfectly. The signal was real. The problem was, we could not identify the source. The frequency did not match anything we had recorded before. Not a geological event. Not wildlife activity. Not human equipment. The geologist on our team, Dr. Elena Voss, studied the readings for almost an hour. Then she said something that I still remember. She said, "Daniel, this pattern is repeating too cleanly." I asked what she meant. She looked at the screen. "Natural events are chaotic. Even earthquakes have irregular patterns. This is different." She pointed at the graph. "It almost looks intentional." Nobody answered. Because everyone in that group understood the same thing. The moment you describe something in nature as intentional, you are no longer talking about nature. The next morning, we searched the surrounding area. The signal appeared strongest near an abandoned research trail that had been closed decades earlier. The trail was not marked on newer park maps. According to old records, it had been used during geological surveys in the 1970s before being abandoned after repeated equipment failures. There was nothing unusual about the trail itself. Just an old path disappearing into the forest. Snow covering most of it. Trees growing through sections where humans had once walked. But as we followed it deeper into the wilderness, something began bothering me. The forest felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not hostile. Just unfamiliar. I have spent enough time outdoors to recognize when an environment feels different. Animals leave signs. Birds communicate. Predators move carefully. But here, there was almost nothing. No tracks. No movement. No sound. It was as if the forest had become aware that we were there. After several hours, we reached the old research location. Most of the structures had collapsed. A small observation station remained standing, buried beneath snow and covered in moss. Inside, we found rusted equipment. Old notebooks. Broken instruments. And something else. A small metal container hidden beneath the floor. Inside was a collection of handwritten notes. The first page contained only one sentence. Written decades earlier. "The signal is not coming from below Yellowstone." I stared at the words for a long time. Because beneath that sentence, someone had written another. A sentence that made no scientific sense. A sentence that changed everything. "It is coming from somewhere deeper than the Earth." The sentence stayed in my mind long after we left the abandoned station. "It is coming from somewhere deeper than the Earth." At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A desperate thought written by someone who had spent too much time alone in the wilderness. I had seen it before. Isolation changes people. When humans spend enough time separated from society, the brain begins searching for patterns. A strange noise becomes a message. A shadow becomes a figure. A coincidence becomes a warning. The mind hates uncertainty. It creates answers when there are none. I knew this. I had studied survival psychology. I had seen experienced hikers make irrational decisions because fears slowly replaced logic. But the problem was, The signal was real. And the person who wrote those words had heard the same thing we were hearing. We spent the rest of the afternoon examining the abandoned station. The old building was smaller than I expected. From the outside, it looked like a forgotten weather monitoring cabin. But inside, it told a different story. The original equipment had been removed decades earlier, yet strange markings covered sections of the walls. Not symbols. Not language. Just lines. Hundreds of them. At first, I thought they were measurements. Someone tracking distances. Dates. Coordinates. But when Dr. Voss examined them, she noticed something strange. The marks were not random. They followed the same rhythm as the signal. 3 short lines. A long line. 3 short lines. Then a gap. The exact same pattern repeated over and over. "What are you thinking?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. She touched the wall with her glove. "I think whoever made these was not recording the signal." She looked at me. "I think they were responding to it." Nobody said anything after that. Because there was a difference between discovering something unexplained and realizing someone before you had already tried to communicate with it. That evening, we returned to camp. The weather changed quickly. A heavy storm moved through the mountains, trapping us inside the cabin. Snow struck the windows like small pieces of glass. The generator struggled. The lights flickered. And sometime after midnight the signal returned. Except this time. It was stronger. Everyone heard it. The entire cabin floor vibrated. The equipment screens turned on by themselves. The seismic monitor displayed a reading that none of us understood. The signal was no longer coming from one location. It was spreading. Like something underground had shifted. The communications specialist, Marcus Hale, attempted to contact the park station. No response. He tried again. Nothing. Then he checked the radio frequency. His expression changed. "What?" I looked at him. "What is it?" He turned the radio toward us. There was static. But beneath the static was something else. A voice. At first, it was impossible to understand. Just distorted sounds buried inside interference. Marcus adjusted the frequency. The voice became clearer. And then we heard it. A single sentence. "Do not follow the signal." The room became completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because the voice was not coming from outside. It was coming through our own communication system. A system that had no connection. No incoming transmission. No active frequency. Dr. Voss slowly looked at Marcus. "Can you trace where that came from?" Marcus stared at the equipment. His face had gone pale. "No." "Why?" "Because..." He swallowed. "Because the signal isn't entering the radio." "What does that mean?" He looked at the speaker. "It means the radio is generating it." The next morning, we made a decision. A decision I still question. We should have left. Every instinct told me to pack our equipment and get out of that area. But curiosity is one of the most dangerous traits humans possess. We tell ourselves we seek knowledge. We tell ourselves we need answers. But sometimes, deep down, we are simply unable to walk away from something we do not understand. The signal had become stronger. And somewhere beneath the abandoned station, something was causing it. We followed the readings. The source appeared to be beneath the old research area, near the mountain slope behind the station. At first, we found nothing. Just snow. Trees. Frozen ground. Then one of the geologists noticed something unusual. A section of earth where the snow had melted. In the middle of winter. A perfect circle. About 20 feet wide. The ground beneath it was dark. Almost burned. But there was no fire. No volcanic activity. No explanation. We cleared the snow. And we found a metal door. Not an old door. Not something from the 1970s. Something much newer. A smooth black surface embedded into the rock. No handle. No lock. No markings. Just one small symbol in the center. The same pattern we had seen inside the station. 3 lines. A long line. 3 lines. Marcus stepped back. That wasn't here before. Everyone looked at him. What do you mean? He stared at the door. I mean, this area was surveyed before. He pointed toward the mountains. There are old geological maps. This entire section was solid rock. Dr. Voss frowned. Are you saying this door appeared? Marcus did not answer. Because none of us wanted to say it. But we were all thinking the same thing. We spent hours trying to understand the structure. The metal was unlike anything we had encountered. It was not rusted. Not damaged. Not affected by the freezing temperatures. It looked untouched. As if it had been placed there yesterday. But the most disturbing discovery came when we examined the surface. The door was warm. Not hot. Not heated. Just slightly warmer than human skin. Like something on the other side was maintaining its temperature. The signal was strongest there. Almost directly beneath our feet. That was when I noticed something. A sound. Not the vibration. Not the signal. Something else. A faint tapping. I placed my hand against the door. And froze. Because the tapping stopped. Then after a few seconds, it tapped again. 3 times. Exactly where my hand was touching. I immediately pulled away. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. Nobody tried to explain it. Because sometimes the human brain recognizes danger before the conscious mind understands why. And every survival instinct inside me was screaming the same thing. Leave. But we didn't. We opened the door. That is the part one still struggle with. People always ask me why. Why would anyone continue after experiencing something like that? The answer is simple. Fear does not always make people run. Sometimes fear makes people look closer. The door opened without resistance. No mechanism. No sound. It simply moved. Beyond it was a narrow passage descending into the mountain. The walls were not natural rock. They were smooth. Perfectly shaped. The air coming from inside was cold. But not mountain cold. Different. Ancient. The kind of cold you feel when entering a place that has been untouched for a very long time. Our lights reached only a short distance. Beyond that was darkness. Complete darkness. Then the signal began again. But this time, it was louder. And it was no longer coming from beneath us. It was coming from ahead. From somewhere deep inside the mountain. We stood there for several minutes. Nobody wanted to move. Then Dr. Voss stepped forward. Whatever created this? She looked into the darkness. It has been here longer than we have. She took one step inside. And the rest of us followed. Because sometimes the most terrifying discoveries are not the things we find. They are the places that seem like they were waiting for us to arrive. The first thing I noticed when we entered the tunnel was the silence. Not normal silence. Not the quiet you experience deep in the wilderness. That kind of silence still contains life. Wind. Water. Animals. The movement of the earth. This was different. It was a silence that felt complete. Like the mountain had swallowed every sound that entered it. Our footsteps should have echoed. The tunnel was narrow, surrounded by smooth black walls that looked almost artificial. But every step disappeared immediately. No echo. No reflection. Nothing. It felt less like walking through a cave. And more like walking through an empty space where sound was not allowed to exist. I remember looking back toward the entrance. The snow-covered forest outside was still visible behind us. The daylight looked strangely distant. Even though we had only walked a few dozen feet. A part of me wanted to turn around. To leave before we went deeper. But the others continued forward. And I followed. That decision would stay with me for the rest of my life. The tunnel descended gradually. There were no stairs. No markings. No signs of construction. Just a perfectly smooth passage leading downward into the mountain. The deeper we went, the warmer the air became. Our equipment began acting strangely. The compass readings shifted. Digital watches displayed incorrect times. The batteries in our flashlights drained faster than they should have. Small things. Things that could have normal explanations. Except they were happening all at once. After about 20 minutes, Marcus stopped walking. Wait! We all turned. He was looking at the communication device attached to his backpack. The screen was active. A waveform was moving across it. The signal. But something had changed. What is it? I asked. Marcus looked confused. It changed. Changed how? He pointed at the screen. Before it was repeating. He looked deeper into the tunnel. Now it's responding. Nobody understood what he meant. Then the speaker activated. A burst of static filled the tunnel. Everyone froze. Because this time, the sound did not come from our equipment. It came from the walls. A low vibration moved through the tunnel. 3 pulses. A pause. 3 pulses. The same pattern. But now it was everywhere. Around us. Above us. Below us. The mountain itself was carrying the signal. After another hour of descending, we reached a chamber. A massive underground room hidden beneath Yellowstone. The size was impossible to judge. Our lights disappeared into the darkness. The walls stretched far beyond what we could see. At the center of the chamber was a structure. A circular platform. Covered with the same markings we had seen before. But there was something else. Something that made all of us stop. There were footprints. Not animal tracks. Not ours. Human footprints. Fresh ones. They crossed the platform and disappeared into the darkness on the opposite side. Dr. Voss immediately checked them. She looked at the snow and dirt around the entrance. No. Her voice was quiet. What? She looked at us. These shouldn't exist. Why? She pointed down. Because nobody has been here. I stared at the footprints. What do you mean? She looked toward the tunnel behind us. The entrance was sealed. This place was buried. There was no path here. Her eyes moved back to the tracks. These footprints are not old. A cold feeling moved through my body. Because if the footprints were fresh, someone had been inside the chamber recently. And they had not come from where we entered. We searched the chamber carefully. At first, we found nothing. No equipment. No tools. No evidence of previous exploration. Just the platform. The markings. And the signal. Then I noticed something near the far wall. A small metal container. Similar to the one we had found in the abandoned station. I walked toward it. Inside were photographs. Old photographs. The first one showed the same mountain area. The second showed the abandoned research station. The third showed something that made my hands go cold. It was a picture of the underground chamber. Taken decades earlier. Before the tunnel entrance existed. Before we discovered it. The photograph was dated. Dr. Voss took the picture from my hand. She stared at it. This is impossible. Nobody answered. Because we all knew what she meant. If this chamber had been discovered in 1974, why was it abandoned? Why was there no record? Why was it hidden? Then Marcus found the final photograph. The one that changed everything. It showed a group of researchers standing inside the chamber. There were 6 people. 5 of them were facing the camera. The 6th person was standing near the platform. Looking away. At first I thought it was just a mistake. A person caught at the wrong moment. But then I noticed something. The person near the platform was wearing modern clothing. Not 1970s clothing. Modern outdoor gear. The same type we were wearing. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Marcus whispered. That picture wasn't taken in 1974. Dr. Voss looked at him. What? He pointed to the equipment in the photograph. The camera model. He swallowed. That camera didn't exist until years later. The chamber suddenly felt smaller. The darkness around us felt heavier. Because we had entered expecting to find something ancient. Something forgotten. But instead, we found something that seemed to exist outside normal time. That was when the signal changed again. A sound moved through the chamber. Not a vibration. Not static. A voice. This time, everyone heard it clearly. A human voice. Distorted. Weak. Almost like it was traveling through thousands of miles of stone. But the words were understandable. Daniel! My entire body went still. Nobody had told the system my name. Nobody had spoken. The voice repeated. Daniel! I looked at the others. Their faces told me everything. They heard it too. The voice was calling me. Not my team. Not everyone. Me. I stepped backward. Who is that? The chamber remained silent. Then the voice answered. And the words that followed are something I have never been able to forget. Because the voice did not come from the tunnel. It did not come from the walls. It came from behind us. You're finally here. We turned. Our lights moved across the darkness. Nothing. Only the empty chamber. But then something happened. The signal stopped. Completely. For the first time since we discovered it. There was silence. Real silence. And in that silence, we heard something worse. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Coming from the darkness beyond the platform. Not approaching us. Walking away. Like whoever had been waiting there. Had just left. We should have escaped immediately. Any reasonable person would have. But by then, something inside all of us had changed. The fear was still there. But it had mixed with something else. A need for answers. We followed the footsteps. And as we moved deeper into the underground chamber, we discovered something carved into the wall. A message. Not written in symbols. Not written in another language. Written in English. 7 words. 7 words that should not have been there. Because the handwriting was mine. The message said. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The human mind has a strange way of protecting itself when something impossible happens. It searches for an explanation. A mistake. A misunderstanding. Anything that allows reality to remain stable. And that was exactly what my brain tried to do. Maybe the handwriting only looked like mine. Maybe someone had copied it. Maybe someone had studied my field notes. Maybe someone had predicted our arrival. Every explanation sounded ridiculous. But every explanation was still easier to accept than the truth. Because the truth suggested something impossible. That somehow, someone had written a warning for me. Before I ever entered the mountain. Dr. Voss was the first person to move. She stepped closer to the wall. Her flashlight moved over the carved letters. Daniel. I looked at her. She pointed to the message. Did you write this? The question should have been easy to answer. No. Of course not. But the strange thing was. For a moment, I couldn't say it. Because the handwriting was mine. Not similar. Not close. Mine. The same pressure in the letters. The same uneven spacing. The same habit I had developed as a child of making certain letters slightly larger. I had spent years writing field reports. I knew my own handwriting. And this was mine. I didn't write that, I finally said. Nobody looked convinced. Not because they thought I was lying. Because they were afraid I might be telling the truth. We decided to leave. The curiosity that brought us deeper into the mountain had disappeared. Whatever this place was. Whatever had created the signals. We were no longer studying it. We were inside it. And there is a difference. Scientists observe unknown things from a distance. They create barriers. They create measurements. They create safety. But we had crossed a line. We were no longer looking at the mystery. We were part of it. We returned toward the chamber entrance. At least, that was what we thought. After 30 minutes of walking, Marcus stopped. Something's wrong. We all turned. What? He looked around. I don't remember this section. The tunnel looked identical. Black walls. Smooth surface. No markings. No change. But something felt different. We checked our location. According to our equipment, we should have been closer to the entrance. Instead, the readings showed we were deeper. Much deeper. Dr. Voss looked at the tunnel behind us. Did we take a wrong turn? Nobody answered. Because there were no turns. The tunnel had been completely straight. We continued walking. The strange thing was not that we were lost. The strange thing was that the mountains seemed to be changing around us. Small details. Things that were impossible to prove. A crack in the wall that wasn't there before. A marking that appeared different. A section of tunnel that felt familiar even though we had never seen it. It reminded me of something I had studied years earlier. A survival phenomenon called environmental confusion. When humans spend enough time in extreme conditions, the brain begins making errors. Distance becomes unreliable. Time becomes distorted. Memory becomes uncertain. It happens in deserts. In oceans. In polar environments. Places where the mind struggles to process endless sameness. But this was different. Because all of us were experiencing it. At the same time. After several hours underground, exhaustion began affecting everyone. Our supplies were running low. Our communication equipment was almost dead. The signal continued. Always present. Always following us. Then we discovered another chamber. But this one was different. The walls were covered with hundreds of photographs. Not old photographs. Recent ones. Images of Yellowstone. Images of the wilderness. Images of people. At first, I thought they were random. Then I realized something. They were all connected. They showed moments. Not important moments. Personal moments. A person sitting alone beside a campfire. A child walking through a forest. A researcher writing notes. A man standing beside a lake. Human memories. Human experiences. Dr. Voss slowly moved through the room. What is this? Nobody answered. Because there was something disturbing about those photographs. They were not showing famous places. They were showing people when nobody was watching. Then I saw one. A photograph placed in the center of the wall. I knew immediately. Before I even reached it. Because I recognized the jacket. The backpack. The mountains behind the person. It was me. A younger version of me. Standing in Yellowstone. But I had never been there before. The date written beneath the photograph was impossible. It was taken 8 years before I joined the research team. Before I ever considered working in Yellowstone. I touched the photograph. And suddenly, a memory came back. A memory I had forgotten. I was 12 years old. My father and I had taken a camping trip. I barely remembered it. Most of my childhood memories were incomplete after his death. But seeing that photograph unlocked something. A feeling. A place. A sound. I remembered standing beside a forest. I remembered hearing something beneath the ground. A low vibration. The same signal. I remembered telling my father. And I remembered him looking frightened. Not confused. Not curious. Afraid. Then I remembered something else. A conversation. One sentence. A sentence my father had told me that I had completely forgotten. Daniel, if you ever hear that sound again. His face had been serious. Do not follow it. I stepped away from the photograph. The others noticed. What happened? I couldn't answer. Because suddenly I understood something. The signal was not discovered by us. It had found us. Or maybe, it had been waiting for someone who could recognize it. At that moment, the lights in the chamber flickered. The photographs on the wall began changing. Not moving. Changing. Like different images were appearing beneath the surface. One by one. New photographs appeared. Pictures of us. Inside the mountain. Walking through the tunnels. Standing in the chambers. Moments from earlier that same day. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Because the implication was impossible. The place was not recording history. It was recording events as they happened. And then the final photograph appeared. A photograph that showed all four of us standing in the chamber. Except there was someone else with us. Standing behind me. A fifth person. Someone we had not noticed. Someone wearing old wilderness equipment. Someone whose face was hidden. But I recognized the posture. The clothing. The way he stood. Because I had seen him before. In the 1974 photograph. The person standing near the platform. Marcus stepped closer. "Who is that?" I stared at the photograph. And a terrifying thought entered my mind. Maybe the question was not, "Who is that person?" Maybe the question was, "When was that person?" The signal returned. But this time, it was not beneath us. It was everywhere. The walls. The floor. The air. And beneath the sound, another message appeared on the communication device. Not a voice. Text. 3 words. "Remember the beginning." Then the chamber lights turned off. Complete darkness surrounded us. And in the darkness, someone whispered my name. Not through the radio. Not through the walls. Right beside me. "Daniel!" I turned. And saw a flashlight beam. Someone was standing only a few feet away. A person who should not have been there. A person who looked exactly like me. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The human mind has limits. There are certain things it refuses to process because accepting them would mean accepting that everything you understand about the world is incomplete. Seeing another person in that chamber was terrifying. But seeing myself, that was something else entirely. The flashlight beam shook slightly. Not because of the person holding it. Because of my own hand. My body reacted before my thoughts could catch up. Every survival instinct inside me screamed the same thing. Run. But I couldn't move. The figure stood several feet away. Silent. Still. Wearing the same type of wilderness clothing I was wearing. The same faded green field jacket. The same heavy boots. The same equipment pack. But the details that terrified me were not the similarities. It was the differences. The person looked older. Much older. The face was partially hidden in shadow, but I could see enough. The same eyes. The same scar near the left eyebrow. A scar I had received when I was 17. A scar that nobody else in that chamber should have known existed. Then the figure spoke. And hearing my own voice come from someone else was the most disturbing sound I have ever experienced. "You should have listened." Nobody moved. Dr. Voss raised her flashlight. "Who are you?" The figure looked at her. Then back at me. I already answered that. My stomach tightened. Because he had not answered. Not with words. But somehow. I understood. He was not saying he was like me. He was saying he was me. Older. Changed. Broken. A version of myself that had somehow survived something impossible. Marcus slowly reached for his radio. The figure immediately looked at him. "Don't." Marcus froze. "How did you know what I was doing?" The figure did not answer. Instead, he looked around the chamber. Almost sadly. "This place does not show you what you want to know." His eyes returned to me. "It shows you what you are trying to forget." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who are you? How are you here? What is this place? What happened to the researchers from 1974? But the first question that escaped my mouth was something else. "Did you write the message?" The older version of myself looked toward the tunnel. "The message? The warning?" A strange expression crossed his face. Not fear. Not confusion. Regret. "Yes." The chamber seemed colder. "When?" He looked at me. "Not when." A pause. "Where?" I still struggled to explain what happened next. Because there are moments in life where time stops feeling like a straight path. We imagine time as a road. One direction. One beginning. One ending. But what if time is not a road? What if it is a place? A place where moments exist beside each other, waiting to be discovered. The chamber beneath Yellowstone was not a machine. It was not a weapon. It was not an ancient civilization. It was something far stranger. A place where human consciousness connected with memories that had not happened yet. The signal was not transmitting information. It was revealing possibilities. Versions of ourselves. Choices we made. Choices we avoided. Paths we never walked. The greatest horror was not that something was buried beneath Yellowstone. The greatest horror was realizing something beneath Yellowstone had been buried inside us all along. The older version of me walked toward the center platform. The first researchers thought they discovered something beneath the mountain. He looked at the markings. They were wrong. Dr. Voss watched him carefully. What did they discover? He looked at her. Themselves. Nobody spoke. Because that answer sounded meaningless. Until he continued. This place does not create monsters. It doesn't bring things from somewhere else. He looked at the photographs covering the walls. It reveals what people become when they are forced to confront everything they have hidden from themselves. I remembered my father. The camping trip. The sound beneath the ground. The warning. But now another memory returned. One I had buried. One I had spent years avoiding. After my father died, I convinced myself I remembered everything about him. The good moments. The lessons. The things he taught me. But I had forgotten something important. The last conversation we ever had. He had not been afraid of the signal. He had been afraid of what it showed him. He had told me. Some places don't show you the future, Daniel. They show you the person you become if you stop running from the past. The older version of me looked at me. You came here because you wanted answers. I said nothing. Because he was right. My entire life had been shaped by unanswered questions. My father's death. The memories I couldn't recover. The reason I felt connected to wilderness. I had spent years studying nature because I thought I was searching for something outside myself. But maybe I was searching for something I had lost. What happened to you? I asked. The question seemed to hurt him. I reached the end. What does that mean? He looked toward the darkness beyond the chamber. It means I found what I wanted. And? He looked back at me. And I learned that some answers are heavier than questions. Suddenly, the signal changed. The entire chamber shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The walls began vibrating. The older version of myself looked alarmed for the first time. You need to leave. What? Now. Why? He looked at the platform. Because the chamber is collapsing. Dr. Voss looked around. There is no collapse warning. The older version of myself looked at her. It doesn't collapse physically. A pause. It collapses psychologically. Nobody understood. But then we noticed something. The photographs on the walls were disappearing. Not falling. Not burning. Vanishing. One by one. Like memories being erased. The chamber was changing. We ran. For the first time since entering the mountain, we stopped searching for answers. We just ran. The tunnels shifted around us. The path we entered through was gone. New passages appeared. Old passages disappeared. It felt like the mountain itself was reacting to our fear. Behind us, the signal grew louder. Not a sound anymore. A feeling. A pressure inside the mind. Memories surfaced. Painful ones. Forgotten ones. Moments we had buried. Dr. Voss collapsed against the wall. She was crying. Not from injury. From memory. She whispered a name. Someone she had lost years earlier. Someone none of us knew about. Marcus was standing completely still. Looking at nothing. Repeating. I should have gone back. I should have gone back. I grabbed him. Marcus! He looked at me. And for a second, he did not recognize me. That was the true danger of the chamber. Not death. Not being trapped. Not some creature waiting in darkness. The danger was becoming lost inside yourself. The human mind can survive many things: cold, hunger, isolation. But facing every regret you have ever buried? That breaks people. Eventually, we found the entrance. The metal door was open. The forest waited outside. Snow fell gently. The morning light was beginning to appear. We had been underground for what felt like days. But according to our equipment, only 11 hours had passed. The entrance closed behind us. Not slowly. Not dramatically. It simply disappeared. The mountain became solid rock again, as if nothing had ever been there. We returned to the research station. We reported the incident. At least we tried. But every recording was corrupted. Every photograph was blank. Every measurement was impossible. The official report concluded that the equipment malfunctioned due to environmental interference. A simple explanation. A comfortable explanation. And I allowed them to believe it. Because some truths are not meant to be proven. I left wilderness research shortly afterward. I never returned to Yellowstone. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That vibration beneath the ground. 3 pulses. A pause. 3 pulses. And sometimes I wonder, was the signal really coming from beneath the earth? Or was it coming from somewhere deeper? Somewhere inside every person. Because maybe the greatest mysteries are not hidden in forgotten mountains. Maybe they are hidden in the parts of ourselves we refuse to explore. Years later, I received a package. No sender. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. An old photograph. The underground chamber. The platform. The markings. And 4 people standing inside. Me. Dr. Voss. Marcus. And someone else. Someone standing behind us. Someone who should not have existed. On the back of the photograph were 5 words. Written in my handwriting. The signal is still waiting. I never found out who sent it. I never learned whether the chamber was real. I never discovered what was truly beneath Yellowstone. But I learned something about fear. We spend our lives believing darkness hides things from us. Monsters. Secrets. Unknown dangers. But sometimes darkness does the opposite. Sometimes darkness reveals things. The parts of ourselves we ignore. The memories we bury. The truths we are afraid to face. And perhaps the most terrifying discovery a person can make is not finding something unknown in the darkness. It is discovering that the darkness already knew your name. For almost a year, I tried to convince myself that the photograph was nothing. A mistake. A coincidence. A cruel joke created by someone who knew enough about my past to manipulate me. That is what humans do when faced with something impossible. We create smaller explanations. Not because they are true. Because they are easier to survive. The alternative was accepting something far more disturbing. That somewhere beneath Yellowstone, something existed that did not follow the rules we depended on. Time. Memory. Identity. All the things that made us feel safe. I wanted to believe those things were permanent. But after what happened beneath the mountain, I was no longer certain. I kept the photograph locked away. I never showed it to anyone. Not my colleagues. Not my family. Not the researchers who contacted me months later asking questions about the Yellowstone expedition. Because I knew what would happen. They would analyze it. Measure it. Search for explanations. They would try to turn something terrifying into something understandable. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing humans could do. Not exploring the unknown. But assuming the unknown existed only to be explained. 6 months after leaving Yellowstone, I moved to a small cabin in northern Montana. I wanted distance. Not just from the mountains. From everything connected to that place. I stopped reading scientific reports. I stopped following geological research. I stopped searching for answers. For the first time in my life, I accepted that some questions might never have answers. And strangely, that brought me peace. Until the radio turned on. It happened during a storm. The kind of storm that makes the entire world feel smaller. Snow covered the roads. The wind shook the windows. I was sitting beside the fireplace when the old emergency radio on my shelf suddenly activated. I had not used it in years. The batteries were removed. At least I thought they were. Static filled the room. I immediately stood. Because I knew that sound. I knew what came next. 3 pulses. A pause. 3 pulses. My entire body went cold. The signal. It had followed me. I approached the radio slowly. Every instinct told me not to. Every memory told me to walk away. But curiosity is not something humans simply lose. It is part of us. The same instinct that leads explorers across oceans. The same instinct that sends people into unknown forests. The same instinct that brought me beneath Yellowstone. The static continued. Then a voice appeared. Weak. Distorted. Almost impossible to hear. But familiar. Daniel. I closed my eyes. Because I already knew. I already knew whose voice it was. Mine. The voice continued. You think you escaped. The room felt colder. You think leaving the mountain means leaving the signal behind. The radio crackled. But you misunderstood. I stood completely still. Because there was something different about the voice this time. It was not warning me. It was not asking for help. It sounded almost relieved. I was never beneath Yellowstone. A pause. I was beneath you. The radio went silent. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. The storm outside continued. The fire continued burning. Everything looked normal. And that was the worst part. The world had returned to normal. But I had changed. Because once you see something impossible, you can never completely return to the person you were before. A few weeks later, I received another message. This time, it was not a photograph. It was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was mine. The paper looked old. But the words were clear. Only one paragraph. Only one warning. Every person who reaches the chamber believes they are searching for something hidden. They are wrong. The chamber does not reveal secrets. It reveals connections. Every fear, every regret, every choice we avoided creates a path. The signal does not call people into the mountain. It calls people back to themselves. At the bottom was a date. A date 20 years in the future. I burned the letter. At least I tried. The paper turned black. The edges curled. But the words remained. Perfectly visible. As if the message was not written on the paper. As if it was written into it. Years passed. I grew older. I stopped searching. I stopped running. Eventually, I accepted something important. The experience beneath Yellowstone was not a story about a hidden place. It was not about a mysterious signal. It was not about something waiting beneath the earth. It was about every person who has ever carried something they refuse to face. Everyone has a hidden chamber. A place inside themselves where they store memories they cannot accept. Regrets they cannot release. Questions they are afraid to ask. We spend our lives avoiding those places. Because we believe darkness exists to hurt us. But maybe darkness is not always an enemy. Maybe sometimes darkness is where we finally see clearly. I never returned to Yellowstone. But occasionally I receive signs. Small things. A strange pattern in static. A familiar vibration beneath my feet. A dream where I am standing inside that underground chamber. And every time, there is one thing that remains the same. The platform. The markings. The darkness beyond. And a figure standing at the edge of the chamber. Waiting. Watching. Older than me. Younger than me. A version of myself I have not become yet. People often ask why humans are drawn to mysteries. Why we explore abandoned places. Why we search through forgotten forests. Why we look into darkness even when we are afraid of what might look back. I think I finally understand. We are not searching because we believe there is nothing there. We search because some part of us already knows there is. The unknown scares us. But the unknown also calls to us. Because deep down, every person wants to know the truth. Even if the truth changes everything. The last time I heard the signal was 3 years ago. I was sitting outside my cabin. The night was quiet. The stars were visible above the mountains. Then the ground beneath my chair vibrated. 3 pulses. A pause. 3 pulses. I looked toward the forest. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No figure. No voice. Only darkness. Then my radio turned on. And for the first time, the voice was not mine. It was my father's. He said only one thing. Daniel. A pause. You finally understand. I have spent my entire life studying the wilderness. Trying to understand its dangers. Its mysteries. Its hidden places. But after everything I experienced, I believe the greatest wilderness is not the one outside us. It is the one within. Because forests can be mapped. Mountains can be climbed. Caves can be explored. But the human mind, the human heart, the memories we bury and the fears we hide, those places remain unexplored. And sometimes, the most terrifying discovery waiting in the darkness is not something that has been hiding there. It is the part of ourselves we left behind. For years, I believed the signal had ended. I needed to believe that. There is a certain comfort in thinking a nightmare has a final page. A beginning. A middle. An ending. That is how humans organize fear. We put monsters into stories. We put mysteries into boxes. We tell ourselves that once the danger is gone, we can move forward. But some things do not disappear. Some things simply become quiet. And silence can be more frightening than noise. Because silence leaves room for imagination. After the final transmission from my father's voice, I stopped recording everything. No more journals. No more research. No more attempts to understand what happened beneath Yellowstone. I had spent years chasing answers. But eventually, I realized something. The answers were not changing anything. Knowing what the chamber was did not matter. Knowing where the signal came from did not matter. The only thing that mattered was what it forced me to confront. The memories I had buried. The fears I had ignored. The person I had spent my entire life trying to avoid becoming. Myself. Then, 12 years after the Yellowstone incident, I received a phone call. I almost didn't answer. I rarely picked up unknown numbers anymore. But something about it felt different. A feeling I had not experienced in years. A warning. I answered. At first, there was only static. I almost hung up. Then someone spoke. Daniel Mercer? The voice was unfamiliar. An older man. Professional. Calm. I'm calling from a geological research institute. My hand tightened around the phone. I'm not interested. The man paused. Then he said something that made me stop. We found another signal. For a few seconds I said nothing. Because those words had a strange weight. Not because they surprised me. Because some part of me had always known they would come. Where? The man hesitated. Yellowstone. I closed my eyes. Of course. It had never really left. The researcher explained that they had discovered unusual underground activity in a remote section of the park. At first, they believed it was a normal geological event. A thermal shift. A seismic anomaly. But the readings changed. The pattern appeared. 3 pulses. A pause. 3 pulses. I asked him the question I already knew the answer to. Did anyone hear a voice? Silence. Then, yes. My heart sank. Whose voice? The man took a long breath. We don't know. I waited. Then he continued. But whoever heard it. Another pause. They all heard the same thing. I should have refused. I should have stayed away. I had spent years building a life beyond that mountain. A quiet life. A normal life. But there is something people misunderstand about fear. They think fear is only about avoiding danger. But sometimes fear is also about unfinished business. A question without an answer. A door left open. A story without an ending. And my story with Yellowstone had never ended. It had only been waiting. I returned to the park in the autumn. The landscape looked exactly the same. That was the strange part. The world had continued. Tourists walked along the trails. Families took photographs. People stood beside geysers and watched the steam rise into the sky. They had no idea what existed beneath their feet. They had no idea how thin the line was between the world they understood and everything they could never explain. I traveled with a new research team. Different people. Different equipment. But the same feeling. The same silence. The same sense that the forest was watching. The location was farther north than before. A place untouched by roads. No trails. No signs. No human presence. The kind of wilderness where nature feels older than humanity. When we reached the site, I knew immediately. The ground felt familiar. Not because I remembered it. Because something remembered me. The equipment was already set up. The researchers had built a temporary station. But nobody looked excited. Nobody looked curious. They looked afraid. That told me everything. The lead scientist, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Shaw, approached me. "You were right." I looked at her. "I never said what was here." She looked toward the forest. "No." She lowered her voice. "But you knew." I did not answer. Because I didn't want to admit something. A terrible truth. Part of me had been waiting for this. That night, the signal appeared. Exactly at 2:17 in the morning. The same time. The same pattern. The same impossible rhythm. Everyone gathered around the equipment. Nobody spoke. The readings climbed higher than anything we had seen before. Then the radio activated. Static. A pause. A breath. Then a voice. Not mine. Not my father's. Someone else's. A woman's voice. Weak. Distorted. Terrified. "Please!" Everyone froze. The voice continued. "Don't let him come back." Dr. Shaw looked at me. "Who is that?" I stared at the radio. Because I knew. I had heard that voice before. Not in person. Not in memory. In the photographs. In the chamber. The person who had been standing beside the platform in 1974. The person who had disappeared. The first person to discover the signal. The first person who never returned. Then the voice spoke again. And the entire world seemed to become smaller. Because it said my name. "Daniel." A pause. "You need to understand." The radio crackled. "The signal was never trapped beneath Yellowstone." The ground began vibrating. "The signal was a doorway." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the final sentence came. A sentence that changed everything I thought I knew. "The mountain was never hiding something from us." Static filled the air. "The mountain was protecting us from it." The ground split. Not violently. Not like an earthquake. Slowly. Almost carefully. A thin line appeared in the earth. A small opening. And beneath it, a faint light. Not natural. Not artificial. Something impossible to describe. The researchers stepped back. Everyone looked at me. Because somehow, they expected me to know what to do. But I didn't. For the first time in my life. I had no answers. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Heavy. Familiar. I turned. Nobody was there. Only the forest. Only darkness. But then I saw something carved into a tree. Fresh. New. Impossible. 7 words. The same handwriting. My handwriting. "You were never the first, Daniel." I stood there for a long time. Because suddenly, every memory I had, every moment, every choice, every path I believed belonged to me, felt uncertain. Maybe the chamber did not show us the future. Maybe it did not show us the past. Maybe it showed us something much more frightening. The possibility that identity itself was not as permanent as we believed. That somewhere, in some hidden place beneath the world, every version of ourselves still exists. Waiting. Watching. Remembering. I left Yellowstone the next morning. I never returned. The research team continued their investigation. Or at least, that is what they told me. But I know better now. Some discoveries are not meant to be completed. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Because humanity has always believed darkness hides monsters. But sometimes darkness hides mirrors. And the thing staring back at us is not something unknown. It is something familiar. Something we recognize. Something that has been waiting patiently for us to finally look. I still study wilderness. Not professionally. Not scientifically. Just as a reminder. The forests. The mountains. The empty spaces. They are not our enemies. They are not trying to scare us. They are simply showing us something we often forget. The world is much larger than our understanding of it. And the human mind is much deeper than we are willing to explore. So if you ever find yourself alone in the wilderness, and you hear something beneath your feet, something calling, something repeating, something that sounds almost like a voice, remember this. Not everything hidden wants to be discovered. And not every signal is a message. Sometimes it is a warning. I thought leaving Yellowstone for the second time would be easier. I was wrong. The first time I left, I carried fear. The second time, I carried something much heavier. Doubt. Fear is simple. Fear tells you to run. Fear keeps you alive. But doubt follows you home. It sits quietly in the back of your mind. It waits until the world becomes quiet. Until you are alone. Until you have no distractions left. Then it asks questions you cannot answer. Questions like, was it real? Did it happen the way I remember? Was I changed by the experience? Or was I always meant to find it? After the second Yellowstone incident, I disappeared from public research completely. No interviews. No documentaries. No scientific discussions. The few people who knew what happened were asked to remain silent. Not because of some government order. Not because of a hidden conspiracy. But because none of us knew how to explain something that even we did not understand. How do you describe a place that changes depending on who enters it? How do you describe a signal that does not transmit information but memories? How do you describe hearing your own voice warning you about a future you haven't reached? There are some experiences that become smaller when you speak about them. Words are too limited. They make impossible things sound ordinary. For years, I studied the old records. Not publicly. Not officially. Privately. I searched through archived reports from early Yellowstone expeditions. Old geological surveys. Forgotten research documents. Anything that might explain what we found. And slowly, I discovered something disturbing. The chamber was not discovered in 1974. That was only the first documented attempt. There were references to it much earlier. A few sentences hidden in old journals. A few strange notes from explorers who mentioned unusual vibrations beneath the valley. Voices heard within stone. Memories experienced as if they belonged to another life. Most researchers ignored those writings. They considered them mistakes. Stories created by exhausted travelers. But after Yellowstone, I knew better. The oldest reference I found came from a journal written in 1898. The author was a wilderness surveyor mapping remote areas near Yellowstone. Most of his notes were ordinary. Measurements. Weather observations. Wildlife reports. Until the final pages. The handwriting became unstable. The sentences became shorter. Almost frightened. One entry said, "The mountain does not contain a secret. The mountain contains a reflection." Another said, "We entered searching for what was beneath us. We left carrying what was inside us." But the final entry was the one that disturbed me the most. It contained only one sentence. If you hear the signal, do not answer. It already knows you. I closed the journal and stared out the window. Because I finally understood something. The people before us were not searching for the chamber. They were running from it. And every generation made the same mistake. We saw something unknown. And instead of respecting it, we approached. We studied. We opened the door. Human curiosity is one of our greatest strengths. It built civilizations. It created medicine. It sent us beyond our planet. But curiosity without humility becomes something dangerous. Because sometimes the universe does not hide things because they are valuable. Sometimes it hides them because they are dangerous. 5 years passed. Then something happened that made me question everything again. I received a package. No address. No sender. No explanation. Inside was a small recording device. An old one. The kind used in field research decades earlier. Attached was a note. 3 words. Listen carefully, Daniel. I almost threw it away. Almost. But I didn't. Because somewhere inside me, I already knew what was on it. The recording was damaged. Static filled most of it. For several minutes, there was nothing. Then voices appeared. Multiple voices. Researchers. The 1974 team. The first people who entered the chamber. I listened carefully. Most of the conversation was impossible to understand. But one voice became clear. A man. Older. Terrified. We misunderstood the signal. Another voice asked. What do you mean? The man answered. We thought it was calling us deeper. A pause. It wasn't. Static. It was trying to keep us away. I stopped the recording. Because suddenly, every memory rearranged itself. The chamber. The tunnel. The platform. The voice calling my name. The photographs. The messages. Maybe we had misunderstood everything. Maybe the signal was never an invitation. Maybe it was not a discovery. Maybe it was a warning. I listened again. The recording continued. The researcher spoke faster. If anyone finds this, understand. Static. The chamber does not open because you discover it. A pause. It opens because you are ready. My hand went cold. Ready for what? The answer came seconds later. A whisper. Barely audible. But clear. Ready to remember. That night I had a dream. A dream I had experienced many times before. I was standing inside the underground chamber. The platform was ahead of me. The darkness surrounded me. But this time, something was different. There was no fear. No confusion. No panic. I walked toward the platform. And for the first time, I saw what was beneath it. Not a machine. Not a structure. Not an object. A space. A place where thousands of memories existed at once. Every person who had entered the chamber. Every person who had heard the signal. Every person who had searched for answers. Their experiences were there. Not trapped. Preserved. Like echoes. Like footprints left inside time itself. Then someone appeared beside me. My father. Older than I remembered. But exactly the same. I wanted to speak. To ask questions. But he stopped me. Daniel. His voice was calm. You spent your whole life trying to understand what happened. I looked around. Didn't you? He smiled sadly. No. He looked at the chamber. I spent my whole life trying to understand why. I woke before he finished. And for the first time in years, I was not afraid. Because I finally understood what the signal represented. It was not a monster. It was not an alien message. It was not some ancient intelligence waiting beneath the earth. It was something far more human. A place where forgotten parts of ourselves could not remain hidden. A place where every person eventually had to face the same question. Not, what is waiting in the darkness? But, what are you afraid the darkness will reveal? Months later, I returned to Yellowstone. Not as a researcher. Not as an investigator. Just as a visitor. I stood near the mountains. The same mountains that had changed my life. Tourists walked nearby. Children laughed. People took photographs. They saw beauty. They saw nature. They saw a national park. And I saw something else. A reminder. That beneath every beautiful place, there are deeper layers. History. Memory. Secrets. And sometimes, the most mysterious places are not mysterious because they hide something from us. They are mysterious because they reveal something about us. I still don't know what the signal truly was. Maybe nobody ever will. Maybe humans are not supposed to understand everything. Maybe some questions exist not to be answered, but to change the person brave enough to ask them. The wilderness taught me many things. How to survive. How to listen. How to respect what I cannot control. But the greatest lesson came from beneath the mountain. The darkest places are not always empty. Sometimes they are filled with everything we have tried to forget. And sometimes, the thing waiting in the darkness has been waiting because it knows us better than we know ourselves. For a long time, I believed understanding something meant controlling it. That was how I was trained. That was how science worked. Observe. Measure. Record. Analyze. Create a conclusion. Human beings have built their entire civilization around the belief that everything has an explanation waiting to be discovered. And most of the time, that belief has carried us forward. But there are moments when the world reminds us of something uncomfortable. That we are not separate from the unknown. We are surrounded by it. Every day. Everywhere. We simply choose not to notice. After my final visit to Yellowstone, I tried to live normally. I stopped looking for signs. I stopped checking geological reports. I stopped wondering if the signal would return. I built a quieter life. I spent my days writing. Not about what happened. Not directly. I wrote about wilderness. About forests. About mountains. About the strange relationship humans have with places that are larger than themselves. Because I realized something. The wilderness does not frighten us because it is empty. It frightens us because it is not. It is full of things we cannot command. Full of things that existed before us. And will continue long after we are gone. Then, one winter morning, I received a letter. A real letter. Not an email. Not a message. A handwritten envelope. The handwriting was unfamiliar. But the name on the front made my heart stop. It was addressed to Daniel Mercer. No mistake. No explanation. Just my name. Inside was a single page. The message was short. Only a few sentences. You were right about one thing. The signal is not a location. It is not a sound. It is not a place. It is a question. And every person who hears it gives a different answer. At the bottom was a signature. A name I had never seen before. Elias Ward. The name meant nothing to me. Until I searched my old files. Elias Ward. The sixth person in the 1974 photograph. The person standing near the platform. The person nobody could identify. The person who disappeared from every record. Except one. My own memory. A memory that should not have existed. I spent the next several days searching through everything I had. Old documents. Archived notes. Personal recordings. And eventually I found something. A forgotten audio file from the first expedition. A recording I had never listened to. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me knew. Maybe some part of me was afraid. The file was damaged. But one section was clear. A conversation. Between two people. Elias Ward. And someone else. Someone who sounded exactly like me. The recording began with static. Then a voice. Elias, we have to leave. A second voice answered. We can't. Why? A pause. Then. Because we haven't finished. The first voice sounded angry. Finished what? Elias answered, understanding why it chose us. Silence. Then the other voice asked, what if it didn't choose us? Another pause. What if we chose it? I stopped the recording. Because that question stayed with me. Maybe that had been the mistake all along. We always assumed the unknown reached toward us. But what if humans were the ones reaching? What if every discovery was also a decision? What if every door we opened was one we had already wanted to enter? That night, I dreamed of Yellowstone again. But this time, the dream was different. I was not beneath the mountain. I was standing above it, looking down at the entire landscape. The forests, the rivers, the valleys, the endless wilderness. And I realized something. The chamber was never the important part. The signal was never the important part. The mountain was never the important part. The important part was what happened after. The person who entered the darkness was not the same person who returned. When I woke up, there was a message waiting on my computer. A file had appeared. No sender. No timestamp. Just one title. The final recording. I stared at the screen for almost an hour. Every instinct told me not to open it. But I already knew something. If I refused to listen, I would spend the rest of my life wondering. And wondering can become its own kind of prison. So I pressed play. The recording was not from Yellowstone. At least, not from the location I knew. It began with a voice. A young voice. Confused. Afraid. Is this working? A second later. My name is Daniel Mercer. I froze. The voice continued. I don't know how long this recording will survive. My hands became cold. Because the voice was mine. But younger. Much younger. A version of myself from before the first expedition. Before the chamber. Before everything. The recording continued. I think I understand now. Static. The signal doesn't show us the future. A pause. It shows us the paths we abandoned. I listened without moving. The people we could have become. Static. The choices we never made. Then the voice became quieter. And the versions of ourselves that are still waiting. I closed my eyes. Because suddenly, I understood the final truth. The chamber beneath Yellowstone was not creating copies of people. It was revealing possibilities. Every version of ourselves that existed in the endless branches of human choice. The person we became. The person we almost became. The person we were afraid of becoming. The person we lost. The final words of the recording were almost impossible to hear. But I heard them. Because they were meant for me. Daniel. A pause. If you are hearing this. A breath. Then you already know. Static. You were never searching for the signal. Silence. The signal was searching for the version of you who was ready to listen. The recording ended. The screen went black. And for several minutes, I simply sat there. No fear. No panic. Just silence. Because after everything I experienced, I finally understood. The greatest horror was never that something existed beneath Yellowstone. The greatest horror was that something beneath Yellowstone understood us. Not our names. Not our faces. Something deeper. Our regrets. Our memories. Our hidden fears. The pieces of ourselves we tried hardest to ignore. Years later, I still think about the signal. I still wonder what it truly was. A natural phenomenon? A mystery of the earth? Something beyond human understanding? Maybe. Maybe not. But I no longer search for an answer. Because some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some mysteries exist to remind us of our place in the world. Small. Temporary. Curious. Always searching. If you ever find yourself alone in a remote wilderness. If the trees become too quiet. If the darkness feels heavier than it should. If you hear something beneath the earth. Something repeating. Something waiting. Something calling your name. Remember this. The unknown is not always something outside of us. Sometimes it is the part of ourselves we have been running from. And sometimes, the deepest darkness is not where we lose ourselves. It is where we finally find what was hidden there all along. I used to believe every story had an ending. That was something I learned from books, from movies, from the way humans tell stories around fires and across generations. A beginning, a struggle, a conclusion, a final moment where everything makes sense. But the older I became, the more I realized something. Real mysteries do not end. They become quiet. They wait. They become part of you. And sometimes, years later, they return when you least expect them. It has been almost 3 decades since I first heard the signal beneath Yellowstone. 3 decades since I followed a sound into the earth and discovered something that changed the way I understood reality. 3 decades since I walked into that mountain believing I was searching for an answer, and walked out realizing I was the question. I am older now. My hands are not as steady. My steps are slower. The wilderness that once felt like home now reminds me that everything eventually changes. Forests grow. Mountains erode. Rivers change their paths. Even the strongest things on earth are temporary. But there is one thing that has remained the same. The signal. It never stopped. Not completely. Sometimes years passed without anything happening. Then, without warning, it would return. A strange vibration beneath the ground. A pattern hidden inside radio static. A dream that felt too real. A memory that did not belong to me. At first, I feared it. Then I ignored it. Eventually, I accepted it. Because there are some things you cannot defeat by fighting them. You cannot escape a shadow by running. You cannot silence a question by refusing to listen. The final message came in the winter of my 71st year. I was living alone in the same cabin where I had first heard the radio years earlier. The mountains were covered in snow. The world outside was completely still. That kind of stillness only exists in deep wilderness. A silence so complete that you can hear your own thoughts. I was sitting near the fireplace when the old radio turned on. The same radio. The same one that had no batteries. The same one that should not have worked. But this time, I was not afraid. I already knew. The static filled the room. 3 pulses. A pause. 3 pulses. I closed my eyes. "Hello, Daniel." The voice came through clearly. Not distorted. Not weak. Not distant. Clear. Human. My own voice. But older. Much older. I looked around the room. "Who are you?" A quiet laugh came from the radio. Not evil. Not threatening. Almost sad. "You already know." For years I had wondered about the older version of myself. The man inside the mountain. The person who warned me. The person who wrote the messages. The person who seemed trapped between moments. I had spent my life asking, who was he? Where did he come from? How was he possible? But I finally understood. Those questions were incomplete. The real question was, why did I need him to be someone else? The voice continued. "You spent so much time trying to understand the chamber." A pause. "But you never asked why it showed you yourself?" I stared into the fire. Because I knew the answer. The chamber showed people themselves because that was the one thing humans understood the least. We spend our lives looking outward. Searching the universe. Exploring oceans. Mapping planets. Discovering distant worlds. But we rarely explore the place where every experience begins. Our own minds. The radio crackled. "You thought the chamber was beneath Yellowstone." The voice became quieter. "But Yellowstone was only the entrance." I felt a chill. Entrance to what? Silence. Then, to every place humans refused to look. The fire moved gently. The room felt strangely familiar. Like I had experienced this moment before. And suddenly, I remembered something. A memory from childhood. A memory I had forgotten. Before my father died. Before Yellowstone. Before the signal. He had taken me camping. I was young. Too young to understand what he was trying to teach me. We sat beside a fire beneath the stars. And he said something I never forgot. But I never understood. He said, "Daniel, people think darkness hides things." He looked into the forest. "But darkness also reveals." I spent my whole life believing my father was warning me about something outside. A danger. A place. A mystery. But he was not. He was warning me about something inside. The radio spoke again. "The door is open." I looked toward the window. The forest outside was completely dark. "What door?" The answer came immediately. "The one you never closed." The next morning, I packed my equipment. Not because I was afraid. Because I finally understood. Some journeys are not about discovering something new. Some journeys are about returning to something unfinished. I drove west. Back toward Yellowstone. The park had changed. Of course it had. Everything changes. The roads were different. The technology was different. The people were different. But the mountains remained. Silent. Ancient. Watching. I traveled alone. No team. No equipment. No mission. Only myself. I reached the location after 3 days. The same valley. The same forest. The same place where everything began. But something was different. The air felt heavier. The trees seemed quieter. And beneath my feet, I felt it. The vibration. The signal. Waiting. The entrance was there. Not the old entrance. Not the metal door. Something else. A simple opening in the earth. A path leading downward. I stood there for a long time, thinking about all the people who had entered before me. The researchers. The explorers. The forgotten names. The versions of myself. Then I stepped inside. The tunnel was exactly as I remembered. Smooth walls. No sound. No echo. But this time, I was not searching. I was listening. And I finally noticed something I had missed all those years ago. The tunnel was not silent. It was full of voices. Not spoken voices. Memories. Thousands of them. Moments from countless lives. People laughing. People crying. People saying goodbye. People forgiving. People letting go. Human experiences preserved like echoes inside the earth. I reached the chamber. The platform was waiting. The markings. The darkness. The impossible place. But there was something new. A final door. A door that had never been there before. No metal. No technology. Just a wooden door. Like the door of an old house. I approached it. And I knew. This was the last choice. A voice came from behind me. "Are you ready?" I turned. My father stood there. Not as a memory. Not as a photograph. Not as a voice. Him. Exactly as I remembered. I wanted to run toward him. But I didn't. Because I finally understood. The chamber was not giving me back the people I lost. It was giving me the chance to accept losing them. My father smiled. "You spent your whole life searching for answers." I nodded. He looked at the door. "But answers were never what you needed." "What did I need?" He smiled. "Peace." I opened the door. And beyond it, there was nothing. No monster. No secret civilization. No impossible machine. Just a room. Empty. Quiet. Waiting. And in the center of the room was a small table. On the table was a notebook. My notebook. The same one I had carried during my first expedition. Except this one was empty. Except for the first page. A single sentence. Written in my handwriting. The story was never about what was beneath Yellowstone. I turned the page. It was about what Yellowstone brought to the surface. I left the chamber. And this time, the door closed behind me. Not because the mystery was solved. Not because I discovered the truth. But because I finally stopped needing to know. I never heard the signal again. Not once. The silence that followed was strange. Almost frightening. Because for so long, the signal had been part of my life. A reminder. A question. A shadow. But eventually, even shadows disappear when you stop running from the light. People often ask me what I found beneath Yellowstone. They expect a story about something terrifying. Something impossible. Something hidden. But the truth is much simpler. I found a place where humans are forced to face the one thing they spend their entire lives avoiding. Themselves. The wilderness taught me survival. The mountains taught me humility. The darkness taught me acceptance. And the signal taught me the greatest lesson of all. The unknown is not always something waiting to destroy us. Sometimes it is something waiting to reveal us. Because the deepest darkness is not the place where we lose ourselves. It is the place where we finally discover who we were all along.